Hello everyone. I know you've been anxiously awaiting more information about paper 3, so today's your lucky day. Here it is. I'm going to do two things in this video. First, I'm going to read through the paper 3 prompt, and then as I do that, I will provide an overview of the primary research that I've done in my experience, and there will be pictures. So let's get started. Here's the prompt. Archival research paper. Researchers do not write off the top of their heads. In fact, obscure subjects inspire the best research writers. And there are discoveries waiting to be found in garages and basements that will someday end up in special collections libraries. Many researchers travel long distances, sometimes internationally, to sit in research libraries and pore over original documents. This is called primary research. The purpose of primary research is to find something new and original and interesting to share with the world. When I was in grad school at Loyola University Chicago, I received a small award to pay for a research trip. It was a very small award, barely enough to pay for plane tickets, but as a poor grad student, I was very happy to have it. I flew to Boston and stayed in a cheap hotel, and the next morning I went to the Houghton Library at Harvard. This is what it looks like on a sunny day. I spent my first day there looking through the Harvard Library collections at different poetry anthologies. That's what my dissertation was about, poetry anthologies. There's only about 5 or 6 people who are interested in that topic. Luckily, my dissertation director was one of them, and I was the other. Other than that, I didn't know anybody personally who would like to read my dissertation. Anyhow, while I was at Harvard, I looked at a lot of unique books in the reading room. This is what I remember the reading room looking like. I sat over here to the right at one of these tables, and I looked at a lot of books. You ask for them and they bring them to you. One book was particularly memorable. It's called Hilda's Book and was written by a controversial 20th century poet named Ezra Pound. He published many books over his lifetime, but he actually made Hilda's book by hand. I had a hard time finding a good image of it. This is the best that I could do. But the book had leather covers. I think it was actually smaller than what you see on your screen. You know, it was a pretty small little book. And it had leather covers, and he made the binding himself. The pages contain love poems that he wrote for Hilda Doolittle, better known as H.D., the poet H.D. I'm not sure the book did the trick because she later married another poet named Richard Aldington. Anyhow, after spending the day at Harvard, I took a night train to New Haven, Connecticut, and I stayed in another cheap hotel and spent the day at Yale's Beinecke Library. The Beinecke is much more impressive, as you can see. Here's the exterior of the building. Excuse me. Behind the person walking, you can see a small wall. And behind that wall is a small empty space that goes down. There, it reveals a courtyard below. So when you walk into the building, you see this glass, the glass enclosed stacks. You actually can't access those. They're kind of on display, and then they will go get those for you if you request them. And then on the right-hand side, let's see in the next picture, down here in the bottom right, they have a copy of the Gutenberg Bible on display. Just a little piece of trivia for you. And then I found a table at the reading room. This is downstairs, and on the right-hand side, you see these windows. Those open or look out onto that courtyard I mentioned before. And so I sat here on one of these tables and requested information. I learned a lot that day, but one particular anthology I looked at many copies of is called Des Imagistes, which was an earlier book of poems by Ezra Pounder that he collected and published. and it was published to tell about a famous or maybe infamous group of poets that called themselves the Imagists. Here's a few pictures. Let me scroll up to the first one that I used in my dissertation. This first one was the New York edition from 1914. This is the dust jacket, the orange, I didn't know existed until I got there. This is the same edition but without the dust jacket. It was blue. This is the London Poetry Bookshop edition from 1914, the same year, a few months after the original publication. This is a New York edition published by Frank Shea. Came out in 1917, so 3 years later. And the most interesting copy that I found that day was by a poet named John Gould Fletcher. You can see from these images he wasn't the happiest guy around. I've actually not seen an image of him smiling. Anyhow, he had an odd relationship with Ezra Pound, and when Ezra Pound asked him, he refused to be in the anthology. So even Pound is known for being pretty persuasive, but he could not persuade Fletcher to be in the anthology. So even after being left out of the anthology, Fletcher's copy of the anthology showed that he read it closely. Let's see. And so on page 62 of the anthology, Pound and some of the other contributors put in this, what looks like a Greek poem. It's actually not Greek, it's Greek letters to spell English words. But we can see from Fletcher's copy of the anthology that Yale holds, and let me thumb through, that he tried his best to translate the fragments, and he did kind of good job, but he missed some lines. He was unable to make connections on some lines, and therefore missed some of the jokes that that Pound and the other contributors were making. So all of this to say that if I didn't have access to this archive, if I wasn't able to go to the Beinecke and look through their holdings, I would not have known about this, the translation, or John Gould Fletcher's attempt at a translation of the poem on page 62. And so because of that, I wouldn't have known that Fletcher was so interested in the movement, the poetry movement, even though he was watching from the outside and didn't want to be a part of the anthology. So all that to say, this kind of primary research made my dissertation possible. If I was not able to access all these copies, the many copies of the book, I would not have been able to write what I did. And so that's what I want you to do. That's the first part of what I want you to do. I want you to dig into digital archives to find something that you didn't even know existed. Find artifacts that most people don't know about and share them with the world in your paper. Let's finish the rest of the prompt, and then we'll be done. So far we've talked about the primary research part. The purpose of primary research is to find something new and original to share with the world. That's what we just talked about. That's what I just showed you some pictures about my primary research. And then when I was done with it, I published it in my own dissertation, which would be the secondary research. So once writers find the original idea, they publish their work in a reliable publication. The resulting paper is called secondary research. In this assignment, the archival research project, you will do both. You'll do both primary research and secondary research. Some of you might actually walk into an archive someday. I hope you do. But this assignment challenges you to dig into digital archives instead. So your task is to find 2 archival artifacts of some kind. I just showed you Hilda's book and then the anthologies from Yale. But you might find a document, an image, a video, an interview. And so use those, something that inspires you and informs you about a topic and helps you choose a topic. For example, you might find a digital copy of an original letter from one influential figure to another. You might find a copy of a receipt or a note to someone important for your topic. Using these artifacts, you'll begin to create a context from which to explore a topic and make an argument. In other words, you're required to find artifacts that most people do not know exist and present them in your paper. From there, you'll use the artifacts from your research to draw your reader into your topic and to be persuaded by your argument. For context, be sure to find at least one newspaper article from the time period of your artifacts. We have access to old newspapers like the New York Times through the library website. The New York Times started around the time of the Civil War and, of course, is still publishing. We have access to all of it. In this project, you'll use at least 8 sources from the library databases, 4 of which will be peer-reviewed academic journals or books. The project must be at least 8 pages. I'm more concerned about the word count, 2,400 words, not including the works cited. And it must be uploaded to Canvas by the designated day. See the course calendar and the syllabus. And of course, please ask me if you're confused. I'm more than happy to help. Here's a tip as you get started. And so don't start with the topic. Instead, dig in to a digital archive and find artifacts that are interesting to you. Research that artifact until you find a topic worth arguing about. In other words, let the archive guide you to a topic. So the artifact should guide you to some kind of controversy or issue that still occurs today. So don't try to think of a topic off the top of your head. Then note there's some off-limits topics. You can read these in the prompt yourself. Oops. And these are off-limits mostly because they're hard to address in a short paper. And because they're the typical arguments that people write about. And so this paper should be something unique, something that you hadn't thought of before, something that you find the historical artifacts and that will bring you into your current topic. So now that we're done with the prompt, would you like to see an example? Take a look at the example paper in Canvas. You will notice that the first half of the paper is more historical and provides context about the topic by discussing the artifacts. The second half of the paper is argumentative and research-based. You will use your historical artifacts to introduce a controversial topic that people argue about today. Finally, be sure to ask me questions. This paper is meant to challenge you, but it should also have an element of fun. I'm not giving you a topic to write about. You get to find something that's interesting to you. I don't know what that is. It's your job to find out. So I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Keep me posted and ask questions, please.